today we have an opportunity to examine some of the practical applications of the knowledge which you have gained here this weekend. The etheric body is an extraordinary phenomenon. It emerges from the physical structures from the embryo onwards and is supplemented by archetypal etheric structures of humanity from the inner worlds. It is a blending, therefore, of our world's etheric material from the etheric globe that interpenetrates the earth, and is also impacted by divine human forms from the inner worlds. For we are, as you well know, we are divine in origin and will return to the divine. One of the phenomena that is frequently spoken of with regard to the etheric body is the phantom limb. The phantom limb. A person goes in for an operation, the leg is amputated, and sometime later, in bed, recovering, these individuals, these amputees, sometimes report feeling in the leg that has been amputated. Feeling, sometimes irritation, sometimes pleasurable. And there are those who believe that the phantom limb must therefore have left behind it its etheric counterpart, that the etheric limb still remains. Well, it's not true. It's not true. The truth is that only in those people who have a very sound body image embedded in their consciousness have this phenomenon happening to them. It's surprising how few people can visualize themselves, have in their consciousness a good body image of themselves. The use of mirrors and other devices like meditation on the various bodies can reinforce this image that we carry with us. When we do have it strongly represented, it is then that an amputated limb may have feeling in its etheric counterpart, which actually, in fact, is not there. It would have to disappear, break up 3, 4, 5 days after the limb has been amputated. But you and I are always concerned with the matter of prana. And today I want to present some new discoveries in the world of occult chemistry, adding to the wonderful information passed on to us by Leadbeater and Besant. Now, we all know that the basis of oxygen's extraordinary power is that it is a requirement of life for oxygen, humans, and it has, of course, other factors as well. When we breathe oxygen in, as you know, probably, we are breathing in the oxygen molecule, which is a twin helix, as it was seen by C.W. Leadbeater, clairvoyantly, by extruding a funnel or unicorn-shaped horn from the space between the eyebrows, the sacred square inch. He was able to steady atoms and then to go right into the very nature of their nuclei. Our interest in oxygen is that we breathe it in, it's necessary for life, and that attached to it there are these globules, these vitality globules, which contain elements of prana. We mean by that the extraordinary thing is that we can sometimes see them. We can see them by putting our eyes slightly out of focus, and then we have the experience, especially above the clouds in an aeroplane, we can see these points of light, and they dart through the atmosphere and disappear. They represent, in fact, the vitality globule that I've drawn here in red. We are really looking at, there's no nucleus to the vitality globule, really. We're seeing the rays of glistening light that emanate from it, and the actual nature of the vitality globule is not seen. All we see is the radiatory energies. Now, the vitality globule is packed with the energy of prana. Prana, of course, comes to us from the sun. It comes to us from the sun, and in the process of reaching us, it is exposed to the solar wind. The solar wind, it is exposed to the energy of background radiation, and we've spent 2 lectures on that subject, and therefore it contains many important factors in the prana. Reaching the earth, it is able to pack itself into the oxygen molecule in the way that I'm doing it here. The prana is brought into the body when we breathe. We draw the prana in, and when it comes into the body, it passes along nadis, light filaments that pack the etheric body. And down these nadis, and especially 2 giant ones called Ida, Sushumna, and Pingala, with the third one, Sushumna, coincidental with the spinal cord and the pineal gland. And so it is the way of man to be able to circulate this prana and, in fact, to store it in what we know as chakras, force centers placed like flowers on the spine, capable of absorbing and storing immense amounts of prana. If you had a reading done of one of your chakras and it registered unit 1 of content of prana, it is possible for a chakra to store 1,000,000 times as much prana. And that is the basis of yoga, the capacity to so pack prana into the chakras and into the nadis as to obtain a preponderance of power over some of the sympathetic ganglia and so on. So the matter of prana is important, and the understanding of the twin helix of oxygen has played a great part in the unravelment of the origin of life in man in this century. The contribution which I can make is towards a deeper understanding of the carbon atom. The carbon atom is, of course, absolutely essential for life. We cannot, our particular, shall we call it, galaxy, for want of more knowledge, our particular galaxy is involved in structures that are built with carbon chains, as we know them. Now, when you look at the carbon atom seen by Leadbeater, we are confronted with a very difficult, probably 4-dimensional object, which is made up of 4 square-like structures, and these 4 square-like structures have within them a cone in each of the pyramidal structures, and there are 4 of them in the carbon atom. The significance of these cone structures, which Leadbeater and Annie Besant seem to have had quite a lot of difficulty drawing because they are probably extra-dimensional, the function of these cones is, not surprisingly, but is observable, and they turn out to be funnels that are able to take the prana that is brought into the body, into the nadis, and to circulate this prana down through the funnels and to store it in some way so that it can be used by the living form that the carbon atom is built into. So we have therefore taken occult chemistry a little further. There are many other things like nitrogen to be examined, and they will no doubt reveal more occult chemical factors. Very interesting role, carbon. The funnels that I've described are very like the funnels of the black holes described in astronomy, where material goes down into the black hole and disappears into, we presume, very compact structures which give out no light at all. Role of oxygen, role of carbon. Pins and needles, pins and needles. Whenever there is an obstruction to the flow of prana in the etheric body, whether it is in the large nadis, in Sushumna, Ida Sushumna and Pingala, or whether it is in the tiny filaments of the etheric body. Whenever there is an impediment, say you are pressing on the arm in a position like that, the effect of this is that you feel the pins and needles, and when you view this clairvoyantly, you have the appearance of billions of points of light struggling to get out of this confined limb. And that confirms what we already know, that prana does not like to be obstructed in any way and will try and fight itself out, even in a limb, in order to get freedom of movement. Pins and needles, a very interesting phenomenon, not really adequately described by modern medicine. And this information certainly helps us to understand what is involved. With the discovery of the etheric body, there will come further knowledge about the nature of life's origin in form. Annie Besant pointed out that the heart has a very special area, there it is, a very special area in one of its chambers where there is a node, a nodule if you like, which receives from the sun one of these or two of these or three of these, I don't know, streams of neutrinos. Neutrinos are neutral particles which have no mass, and they are, as I have said before, the basis of the etheric body's tissues, if you like, in etheric substance. And so streams of electrons enter the region of the sinus node of the heart, and you get the first impulses, the first beats of heart tissue that you see in an embryo very, very shortly after conception. And the sinus node, therefore, is able to pump, to spread prana via the nadis that we've described to all parts of the body. Whether there is actually a second stream of this kind of energy entering the head region, we don't know. What we do know is that at death there always has to be the severing of two structures, two lines of supply, one that feeds consciousness and one that feeds life. And death requires the severing of both of these in order to be permanent. We understand many factors now about the function of the heart that we did not understand before. Somehow or the other, the heart is very, very concerned with its chakra. We call it the heart chakra. It has 10 petals, and it feeds energy into the coronary arteries. The coronary arteries which supply oxygen and prana to the heart muscle. This chakra, the heart chakra, supplies prana to the heart muscle in the blood, the coronary arteries with their blood. But it has other important meanings in the esoteric. The heart chakra is always the chakra that you should feed your esoteric healing qualities into. If there is any doubt about which chakra to act on in your esoteric healing, then put your healing energies into the heart chakra. It is the safest of all. But we understand more things than that. We understand that the heart plays the part of being able to hold different parts together. We are inclined to forget this when we work in holistic healing. We don't understand that a family, when husband and wife are brought together and produce children, that the family is always a whole. It is a holistic structure. And if there is dissent, argument, fear, anger in the family, it is very likely that the effects of that will show in the weakest part of the family. And so husband and wife may keep the peace together despite great anger or sorrow or whatever. You should remember that that anger or sorrow is equally as well the joyous nature of living can express itself through the weak link in the family, which is very frequently a child. And the effect of that energy on this child may impair the integration of the astral body, the emotional body. If it does impair the integrity of the astral body, it will mean that the child will grow up with injuries to that astral body. A divided family will frequently produce that. The other thing about the heart is that it can act in an extraordinary way, again, to unite things like as intricate as a whole factory. The foreman of a factory can become the heart chakra of the factory. His concern for the workers in the factory and their welfare and perhaps their pensions. If it is not taken, the load is not taken up by others in the factory staff, as it were, then this individual becomes the heart chakra of the whole factory and is loaded, often overloaded because of this, and such individuals are very susceptible to heart attack. The incapacity to match the demands made on the prana, on the coronary arteries and so on. Insufficient prana usually, and this can be a very important cause of death, sudden death. So we really have only scratched the surface of our understanding of the etheric body. There is another important factor which is worth considering, and that is the significance of the diaphragm. The significance of the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a sheet of muscle that separates the chest from the abdomen. It acts like a piston in that this is the diaphragm here, and when we use diaphragmatic breathing, that piston comes down, draws air in through the mouth into the chest itself, and it is called, as you know, diaphragmatic breathing. The diaphragm, like a skull cap, marks the division between the animal nature of man and his spiritual nature, if you can do such a thing in framing the anatomy of the body. The importance is that whereas 3 chakras may function below the diaphragm in order to energize the animal type of person or savage, those 3 chakras are more or less adequate, feeding a little of their energy into centers above the diaphragm. But when you tread the spiritual path, it is absolutely fundamental and necessary for these chakras to be reduced in number. And instead of having 3 below the diaphragm functioning, it is necessary to eliminate, more or less, the functioning of one of them. Now, the center at the base of the spine, is fundamental to all living things. Even the living thing that we call a diamond, a gemstone, has 1 chakra. And that chakra represents, in its own sphere of influence, it represents the base of the spine. So the base of the spine must always hold. And you understand that more when you understand that the base of the spine is meant to send its energy up to Sahasrara, the 1,000-petaled lotus, the crowning glory of man. And so one of these 2 have to be eliminated. One of them, the lower one of the 2, is the sacral chakra. It is related to the sexual organs, and the higher one is the emotional chakra, which links you to the energies that pour in to the etheric and emotional bodies from the astral world. So this is an emotional one, and this is the sacral center. When you tread the path, one of those two must be dampened down. Its energies must be passed to the higher chakras above the diaphragm. The Catholic Church, as you know, the Catholic Church was based on the sign of the zodiac called Pisces, the fishers. Jesus was a fisher of men. He was able to take the fish or the man or the person out of the waters of the astral world, the emotional nature, and land him onto a region where the emotional nature did not play such an important part. Well, in the Catholic Church, the essential feature of this was that the sacral center was eliminated, not technically, but eliminated in a sense, by practicing celibacy, not being married, and even chastity, no sex at all of any kind. The effect of this immediately was that the energies of the sacral center were raised above the diaphragm to the throat, and only two chakras function below the diaphragm. I'm not going to give any advice on this matter. I'm just going to leave it there as being something that faces those who tread the path. It is possible to give up the emotional nature, but very hard unless you have great psychological understanding and can allow the spouse to continue more or less in that person's own domain of sex and emotion, whilst you yourself raise your emotional nature from not an attaching, demanding, reciprocating process, but to raise the emotional nature into pure love, the platonic love that we know so well, where there is, I will love you no matter. I don't want anything back for it. I don't want feedback. I don't want any diversion. I will love you irrespective of these usual demands. And in that way, of course, the emotional energy goes above the diaphragm to the heart. It is when you have such a factory manager who has the demands of the whole factory on his shoulders, concern for the whole factory, concern for his own family, and possibly extra demands on either of those two chakras, that you get this candidacy for a coronary heart attack. And so this is another feature of the etheric body. The other thing that I want to bring to your attention is the work that we did at the Delaware laboratories in Oxford in the 1960s. Delaware was an extraordinary genius when it came to instrumentation. And he produced an instrument called the Delaware camera. And that Delaware camera had extraordinary capacities. It was able to photograph some sort of substance which was not light. There was no light involved in it. When the plates were sent to Kodak, the report came back, we don't know what has produced the image on this plate, but it wasn't light. And so the founders of the laboratory, I was medical advisor to them, the founders of the laboratory were perplexed about this. What was this strange thing? For instance, when they took ordinary tap water out of the Oxford water taps, it gave an image of H2O being something like that, this being rays of energy. Hydrogen 2 atoms and oxygen 1. When the water was taken from Lourdes, from the healing fountains at Lourdes, it was shown that the water rays, not light but something, were now laden with energy fields. That somehow or the other the Lourdes water had energy associated with it. Then they had some water blessed by a priest of the Church of England, And in this case, the priest was asked to visualize Jesus on the cross. And the effect of this was that the effect of this visualization of Jesus on the cross produced an image of this sort. My own research work in this field shows that water is made up, as science well says, water is made up of lattices. Snowflakes are not another stage of water made cold. Water, the water in our bodies, and remember we have 60%, 70% of our bodies as water. And so water has the ability to store energy in lattices. We mean, therefore, that it is possible for a sick person to have lattices that are reduced in energy, and it is possible for an esoteric healer to convey the energy of the healer to the patient, and in many ways, but in one particular way, to restore energy to these lattices. Perhaps the same kind of energy that is taken in by the carbon atom and stored in some way for life processes. The effect, of course, of all this is that images were being produced that were unrelated to light. And what were they therefore related to? Well, the obvious thing is that they were related to subtle substance, what we have described here for 3 or 4 days, probably elements of dark matter. Elements of dark matter. And this suggests that dark matter, he could do nothing with all this. It was just way, way beyond science. In fact, the scientists tried to pin him by taking out a high court order which ended up in a trial as to whether Delaware was fraudulently acting. The Delawares won the case in the High Court, and it meant that ever after that, that radionic machines, which Delaware had produced and others after him, were safe from the law. There was no possibility of being charged for fraud. The interesting things about this energy is that you can take a seed like aconite, you can place it below the ground where it can get oxygen, water, and warmth, and long before the seed has begun to put out its plumule and radicle, you find that a picture of this shows, in the Delaware camera, the kind of structure which the seed is going to grow into. The leaves, the plumule, and so on are photographed in the way that that is, and so it suggests that there are force fields developing over a germinating seed which indicate a matrix, an etheric matrix, which is what we refer to when we talk of the etheric body. Some people call it the etheric matrix. Then there is more recently the extraordinary work of Rupert Sheldrake. Rupert Sheldrake seems to have stumbled upon what I would call the blueprint of the universe. It seems that a blueprint is there. Whether it exists with energy like background radiation, I don't know yet. But there is a blueprint, it seems, and things grow into it, and we could be regarded as some of us being those who are sewing in to this blueprint or to this tapestry, sewing in the threads of material substance, as it were. The interesting thing about it, the proposition of morphogenetic fields, that's what Sheldrake calls them, morphogenetic fields, is that you can create them. You can create them. And if you undertook an activity in which you did that, create a morphogenetic field for it. You create a morphogenetic field by your activity. And the effect of this morphogenetic field is it feeds back. It feeds back the qualities that it is beginning to develop. And this feedback can assist you so that you are able to remember the action better. You are able to create the action with less energy demand on you. Well, the application of this, of course, is to homeopathy, where you have, certainly in earlier days, you have the taking of a material and diluting it so that it is 1/10, then 1/100th, then which there is none of this. You are diluting, there's nothing left. But it has always been associated with shaking, and it's always found that shaking the dilution is much more effective, especially if it's done by a human. And so if you shook and shook and shook and shook the material in being diluted, an energy field would arise around it. An energy field would arise around it, and though none of the material is left, the solution, the diluted structure, has got this material, this energy in it, and would feed the patient with it. Well, if you don't think I'm mad by now, it'd be lovely if some of you, of course, could enter the field of research in the esoteric, especially young people. It's needed desperately. My own mind has been brought up in certain ways, and I have certain approaches, but you may have totally different approaches to the same truth. And we want to get it out into the world. It's very important. Let me talk about something completely different, something different. If you can accept that these morphogenetic fields of Sheldrake exist, and he's written a whole book of them, it's on the table outside there, The Presence of the Past, is it? The what? It is a book with hundreds and hundreds of cases of indicating these morphogenetic fields. Very interesting book if you are someone on the frontiers of research. But it is my belief that there also exist karmic fields, karmic force fields, probably interlaced with that concept of the blueprint of the universe, that your karma somehow or the other is woven into a force field and feeds itself back to you in the lives to come. Karma is an extraordinary thing. I must say, after so many years of research, I'm often bewildered by the possibilities of its activity that it presents. We say, of course, that truth is oft-times stranger than fiction. Truth is sometimes stranger than fiction. And we meet in the field of karma many things indicative of this maxim. Some of us have the ability to view the action of karma rather better than others. We can't always predict who this would be, but some of us have this capacity. And we have the understanding of hidden forces, which can be very helpful, especially when we are sought for counseling by somebody. What is wrong with me? Why is it that I have a good brain with a high IQ, and yet I cannot seem to get things to express themselves as well as I would wish or plan to? And then it is possible to feel, see, understand, perceive the nature of the karma that is holding that individual back. I know of two souls in a foreign land that have become inextricably linked with each other's karma. In previous lives, they have been alternatively son and father, brother and sister, even husband and wife. In this life, they are twins. They are twins, which means that the interplay between them is very heavily emphasized. As you know, there is a rapport between twins, probably related to the morphogenetic fields, which shows up every now and again when a twin far distant from another who's been brought up by a different family will each sustain an injury, or will each develop a disease condition which is identical in both of them, and very frequently at almost exactly the same moment in time. So this affinity exaggerates, if you like, makes a caricature of the condition of karma in this life. In this life, they are again in a situation of close relationship, obviously. One twin had been cruelly dominant over the other in previous lives, had had everything, the better looks in that life, the better opportunities, the better family wealth, position, and so on, and had used this advantage cruelly to the despair of the other associated with him. Now they come into incarnation with slightly different karmas, which has to be corrected. The two were out hunting one day in the backwoods of a large continental country, and the one boy, youth if you like, was typically again reversed. And in this life, the one twin is extremely refined and handsome, well-built, and the other twin, the one that was cruel in previous lives, this twin that was cruel, was, even though a twin, not an identical twin, rather clumsy, rather ugly-looking, and so the situation is reversed. They are on this hunting expedition, and the ugly twin, as it were, if I could refer to them like that, the ugly twin is ahead of the nice-looking twin. They go through a wood, and both are carrying guns, and in the wood, the gun of the nice-looking twin goes off and shatters the spinal cord of the ugly one. Now the present karmic situation is that this condition cannot be reversed. The boy is paralyzed, and he has the karmic situation where he is watching, slowly but surely, the other twin grow up into a magnificent specimen, while he himself hurt cruelly, has to observe the whole phenomenon. He is forced into the position that the nice-looking person had been in previously. Well, things happen like that, and although we can't always read them, they are very interesting indeed. Another phenomenon which you should be aware of, and I believe you had handed out a sheet showing webs between the chakras. Webs between the chakras. By this we mean that these force centers here are interpenetrated by webs, circular webs. Let's do it with a little bit of patience. Here is a web which, as the result of its position, is able to inhibit the flow of kundalini up the spine. And so a chakra, one chakra there and one chakra here, is separated by what we call a web. The natural phenomenon, I think they're being handed out now. Thanks. So let me spend a little time on the drawing. Now, the significance of these webs is to prevent an alarming sudden growth in consciousness of humanity. A sudden growth in consciousness which can be dangerous, and the effect of the webs is that they will hold this danger back. They will hold the danger back of energy shooting up the spine and opening the chakras prematurely. The analogy that you can draw to this is when you consider how awful it would be if an adolescent of 14 or 15 became an adult of 22 overnight. If a young person became an adult overnight, what powers would be placed in his nature when the mind and the emotions are not mature? It could be highly dangerous. Well, it's so in the dynamics of spiritual development that these force centers are separated from each other by these circular webs. But as we grow into greater maturity, we now know that the acts of being impure, any impurity in our daily existence as esoteric people, will be reflected in these webs. And so the web between the solar plexus chakra and the heart, greatly related to the position of the lungs, this web traps foul material which is inhaled like smog or smoking and things like alcohol. And the effect is that the web, which has a normal density, as it were, becomes interpenetrated at the etheric level by the etheric reflection of pollution. And if purity is not maintained, and we are seeking to allow spiritual energies to rise up the spine, then the thickening of this web by polluted substances and their etheric counterpart can be a dangerous development. The energy trying to get up is broken up, pierces in places that are not normal, and the web has become consolidated and thickened. The result is that it inhibits spiritual growth. It's not a matter of morals. Not a matter of morals. Most of the things that we consider to be morally invidious, they have nothing to do with morals at all. It is just sheerly the transformation of the etheric body into a higher structure, and the astral body also. So I think it's important for us to spread the word that impurities are dangerous for other reasons, and especially drugs. I remember with wonder reading, first of all, in Leadbeater's works about the awful influence of smoking on the etheric body, and I'm talking about the early 1950s. And it was at a time when nobody thought that smoking could produce cancer and 200 other conditions in the body. Never mind hundreds of other conditions which might exist in the etheric structure as well. And it was to my delight that in 1962 the Royal College of Surgeons, of which I'm a member, suddenly produced a paper giving witness to the fact that although Leadbeater had forecast it in the 1920s, this paper came out in 1962, 40 years later, to show there was a definite link between cancer and smoking. And the truth about this matter is I have no moral attitude to smoking, but the truth of the matter is that it is sheer purity that is opposed, offended by the use of such substances. Alcohol causes conditions of web interference with high up on the spine, in centers that are related to the heart and, of course, to the centers in the head. The particular web that I picked out here is related to the lungs, and it would be this one that would be affected by air pollution of any kind. The result of my own interest in the subject was that in the 1950s and early 1960s, I used to take parties of youngsters out, very naughtily indeed, with spray guns to spray the advertising posters on all the main roads leading out of London with the word cancer right across it, across the poster. Very dangerous and illegal, but you know, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes conditions are desperate. I was watching young people smoking at a very, very early age, and the effect then is even worse on the webs. One of the great discoveries of science is going to be the discovery that out there in space, where there are these fields of dark matter, they will discover that there are living forms in that dark matter, living forms in the dark matter. And these living forms can be usually immense structures, cosmic entities. Whether you call them Sagittarius or Aquarius, it doesn't matter. They're still there and have to be labeled. The Greeks, the Romans, with their mythology, were sensing the presence of these immense living things. There will also be discovered, of course, the fact that our tissues in our body is being constantly regenerated, repaired, and refined by minor lives, tiny little elementals, rebuilding, repairing the organs of the body constantly. And they are very susceptible to light and color, very susceptible to light and color. I have seen these elementals working on the glomeruli of the kidney, and their nature is slightly different from organ to organ. They are greatly encouraged, in the case of muscle tissue, by green light. Green light assists them in the process of repairing muscular tissue. They are also, another group of them that repairs nerve tissue, is very receptive to violet light. One of the things you can do is to hang a violet drape or a violet blanket in the path of the sun, so that you can sit on a chair with your back to the violet light being reflected from the blanket. So you can give yourselves a color bath, which helps stimulate the elementals to grow, to repair, to do their work, as it were. One or two more. I want to just mention the nature of the astral body at death. The nature of the astral body at death. The astral body, of course, is the survivor of the death process. It is the survivor of the death process, and we have all died many, many, many times. And so there has been built up a formula of morphogenetic substance, if you like, of astral substance, of other energies which we need not enumerate on here, so that the astral body, during its detaching from the physico-etheric structure, can be maintained, supported. It's not as traumatic experience as one would expect. It can be a very gentle experience, and the gentleness of the experience can be enhanced by the same activities that we have inherited from our previous lives, the kind of things that can assist the detachment of the etheric body. And if you're esoteric healers, you'll have to sit at the bedside of a person in a terminal illness many times. The kind of things that assist in this process is reading stories of myths, legends, beside the bed, the deathbed, if the patient is capable of being aware of what you are saying. The dream life itself also sustains the astral body, especially in the death scene. And visions occur, and there are many other things that can assist the process, like Gregorian chants, any music that the patient has loved in his life can be played, so that when the actual death separation occurs, they have the comfort of hearing the music in the background, and sometimes way into their journey into the astral world. And so these are all supportive factors. The difficulty arises, of course, when the astral body, and I may invite criticism in this respect, when the astral body is affected by the kind of treatment given to cancer patients before they die. very often totally unnecessary, very often merely to fulfill a contract with some health organization, so you get the whole damn lot as you're dying because it's been paid for. And then, of course, fear of death and the fear of the wife that the husband isn't getting the best treatment, and so they end up with chemotherapy of a very vicious nature, and also radiation. The effect of these attacks on the astral body while it is trying to slip out of alignment with the physical and finally to detach itself is to upset the astral body very, very considerably. My brother died 3 years ago of cancer of the lungs, and I must say that although I had met him in the astral world many times, and he had a delightful astral body, he was a cheerful individual, not morose or anything like that. When he came over after his death, immediately after his death, came over to the astral world, his astral body was in a shocking state. Grey where there should have been pale pink reflections of the skin, as it were. There were now grey areas. He looked like, I once saw a picture of a chimpanzee who had been injected with syphilis for experimental purposes. He looked just like that, with the equivalent of what one could call running sores. And it took about 3 months for that astral body of my brother to recover. He had had the lot, chemotherapy and cobalt and other radiation. These things are worth remembering. Nature has provided a lovely way of dying for the average person if we interfere with nature's gentle processes. And always remember that a person in pain is serving humanity. The karma of our planet is pain. That was the purpose of the Christ, coming to bear more than his share of the planetary pain, so that there was less left behind karmically for those younger souls, as it were, to bear in the future. And pain is not the terrible thing, and no one on this earth can speak about this than my own capacity, for I have suffered it cruelly. But looking back through the years, pain is something that can be very ennobling, it can be very humiliating, and of course it plays a great part in the spiritual destiny of mankind. Try in whatever ways you can to allow the patient to suffer the pain to the utmost degree possible. By that I mean not so that there's pandemonium in the household and recriminations and so on, but where possible to have that pain as much as the human frame, his human frame, can endure. I knew an old lady once, she was an Alice Bailey student, and she was coming to the end of her years. Her faculties were going, and she had practically nothing else that she could do for humanity, but she wanted to do something. She contracted, she had cancer, and she was dying of cancer, and the last 2 or 3 years of her life, she resolved she would not have any painkillers whatever for her condition. And she felt that was the only way that she could serve humanity. Thank you for coming along this morning. To make an